So the first question I have on here I wanted to discuss as a group. The question, what do you wish you had known about forgiveness 15, 20, 40 years ago? The reason I asked this question, I was thinking about it, that some of you, like Patrick for instance, have quite a bit more time than I do in terms of thinking about forgiveness. You've been around a lot longer, so I wonder what it feels like looking back, when you can look back 40 years, for instance. But you get the point. What do you wish you had known when you were younger about this? What difference might it have made? Berlin.
It seems to me personally, that I didn't realize that forgiveness was something that could be categorized and that you could learn about and that you could practice. I didn't know that it was something that I should know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not something we don't necessarily always think of being conscious of it, that it's a skill, and the more we do it, the better you get, etc., etc. I agree. Jocelyn.
Do you think any of this has to do with your family placement? If you've been number 4 in the family or number 9 like Chuck, you get a lot of criticism as a young child. And you think that if something's missing, it must be you taking it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Family placement. You were number 3, right? So maybe.
I was.
Okay.
My best story of that, which I shame my mom with continually, is someone opened some cookies out in the garage and ate them, and I was a fat kid, so I was obviously blamed for that for about a week, and I kept saying I didn't do it, I didn't. Finally, my mom fesses up, says she did it.
Oh!
When you see her again, mention that. Horrific parental story. Yes, I was accused of with her sitting right there. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, but yes, certainly do get blamed sometimes for things. And I think they say that the order of where you are in a family makes a big effect, but your experience as a whole as a child, I think, dramatically affects your understanding of forgiveness, your ability to receive, to give it. I think it can definitely. I talked a lot last week about shame. I think all that comes into that equation as well, and what kind of shame you carry, that was either put upon you, deserved or not. But shame is a big piece of that. Mike?
I think for me, as I've gotten older, I recognize that the amount of time I've got left in this world is shorter and shorter and shorter. And as I've gotten older, I've decided that why carry a grudge or why concern myself with other issues, because it's really serves no purpose other than take some emotional time away from me, strain, whatever, in terms of carrying that around. And so as I've gotten older, I think I've just let it go. And I think it's partly age. I do think it's age.
Yeah.
You got better things to spend your time on than worrying about or wasting it on being upset with somebody.
Yeah, I think along with that, with age, that your priorities change and your desire to be happy and for the people that matter around you to be happy becomes. I mean, we'd all say, yeah, that's important, but I think we don't all do the work it takes or are willing to forgive to make that happen often until you have a little wisdom. Anybody else? Anything that you've learned, not just in this class, but in your life about forgiveness that you?
I don't think that was even in my vocabulary until about 50. Until I was about 50.
Okay.
I didn't thought much at all. Something happened to me though about 50 years ago, made me confront it and think about it. But until that time, it wasn't. I didn't think about it at all.
Yeah.
You said 4 years ago. I'll say 50 years ago.
There you go. There you go.
And for me, it was that it's more for yourself than the other person, which I didn't focus on it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, a surprising number of you, I won't call any names, but a surprising number of you, not surprising, It's what I expected. Come and said that was an important piece and a different way of thinking about it. And quite frankly, it tended to skew towards the younger of us. You know, honestly, but so had that as a revelation in all this. It's about work that we need to do for ourselves.
One of the other comments that you always heard, or at least I always heard growing up, and even now, is that forgive and forget. And if you had to put forgive and forget together, then I didn't feel like I could do it because I couldn't forget. And this has just shed tremendous light that you don't forget, but you can forgive.
Anything else?
You know, along those lines of forgetting, when I was a therapist, I worked with a lot of couples around forgiveness, and especially around affairs. And it was so important to remember that forgetting, that it's important not to forget, that remembering can be a help to us for the future, especially when you're working on a relationship that you want to heal and you want to grow. That remembering the hurt that you caused and how you caused it can help you in the future. Not that you dwell on it all the time, but that you use it.
Yeah. I think that can be a good reality check for us all too when we start trying to convince ourselves that we would never, I wouldn't be like that, but I wouldn't. Well, you have and quite likely will be again. Yes?
And on that thought, Wes, I just thought about something. Empathy and forgiveness can be all over. You know, all of us can stand up and we have a different definition of it. But I think about empathy. And it doesn't matter if you walk in someone's shoes or not. To understand if someone has a problem, they're speaking to you, or you've never encountered that problem in your life, to step back and to embrace, appreciate, stop, listen to what's going on with them.
Anything else? All right, we're gonna start the video again. We'll watch. We got just 2 more little segments of it. We'll watch one and discuss, and then we'll go to the second one.
I think it's hardest to forgive or consider forgiving someone when the person's died. And for me, my situation was that I was infatuated as a college student with someone who was about 12 years older than I was. And I was young and he was foolish. And we got involved in a relationship. And that wasn't so much of the problem or the issue. The problem and issue is that, unbeknownst to me, he was having problems with his sexual identity. And so he was playing both sides of the field. Now this was unbeknownst to me, and we were having a serious relationship. The relationship broke off suddenly without him giving me much information. So not only was I angry and hurt, he left out of my life, relocated to Texas, and went and talked to me. A year later, I found out that someone called me a couple of weeks and told me that he had died of AIDS. And the change and the horror and the emotional strain it put on me caused me to have such anger and hatred of not only him personally, but of the dirt that men will do, etc., etc., etc. Can't figure yourself out, go somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. And you talk about forgiveness, and no matter how much I've worked it out for myself, from that point of that next day, putting all fear aside and taking that HIV test, to going through all other things, putting forgiveness in front, even though maybe I can understand now, has been the hardest part of all. And I have to admit, I still haven't done it yet.
Cheryl's experience shows how complicated forgiveness is, because life is so complicated. Hurt can get so beclouded with 1,000 side issues. I hear her say, I don't know how to forgive somebody who's dead and gone. He's not around to say I'm sorry. He's not around for me to say I forgive you. So that's hard. She has to do what I call a solo flight into her own healing. She's also faced with the fact that she's not sure how much to blame him. He certainly hurt her, but she's not sure whether she should be blaming him for it. He was having trouble discovering who he was, discovering his own sexuality. But the fact is that he used her. He used her to make a discovery for himself, and then left her. I think that guy needs to be forgiven, and I think Cheryl can be helped by forgiving him. But it'll be a tough job for her, because she won't have that wonderful experience of reconciliation that often we want to follow forgiveness. But she's just going to have to come to terms with the fact that she's got a real case of a pain she should never have borne. And the most important thing that I would want to tell her is be patient with yourself. Be patient with yourself. A deep hurt like this takes time to heal. He found Lupe.
All right. So, there at your table, the Guild group, there's just one question under this. Is it important to forgive someone even if they're dead? We'll discuss it for a minute and then we'll talk about it as a group.
Well, yeah, I think it's.
What do you got? I don't need you to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, why?
Yes, it is. For you.
Okay.
If not any, I mean, the dead person's dead. So you can't talk or do anything with that, but you have to let it go yourself because it will tear you up if you don't. And so you have to forgive them. And that's just a fact. It'll just eat your soul up.
And generally in my experience, maybe you all have had some other experiences, but people who are struggling to forgive someone who's dead are generally struggling with a pretty big issue. A pretty major thing. Talking about kids who have been abused sexually or otherwise. You're talking about people whose loved ones or friends maybe have overdosed on drugs, committed suicide, etc., etc. There's some situations where people struggle with that, and it's usually not a minor thing by any means. I have a lot of people from the age of 30 on up to 90 who come to my office to talk about issues they have with their parents, things they need to forgive and let go of, hurts that are still tearing them up. It doesn't just go away on its own. Sometimes we can shove it down and ignore it for a while. But as I talked about a few weeks ago, it comes out somewhere. You may not be aware of where it's coming out, but it's coming out somewhere, sometime.
Usually the wrong way, too,
oh,
right?
Without a doubt, the wrong way. I think any hurt, pain that we have that we're not aware of and or at least trying to deal with is going to come out the wrong way. Because it's only when we're angry enough, irritated enough to let that guard down that it's going to come pouring out. It's usually not at our calm moments when we're in control.
And Wes, what happens, a person is dying and they're asking for forgiveness and you're physically looking in their eyes, you're right there with them.
That is a great
But
question.
the other person is not willing.
Yeah.
Need to be.
Yeah. What do you all think? Did everybody hear the question? What do you do when someone is right there dying, they're asking you or someone else to forgive them, but you or that person are unwilling? What?
I think that person that's sitting there ought to be scared because the person dying is going to be God first.
Okay.
He's going to tell on him.
Yeah.
You have been living with Chuck way too long.
The dying person is asking for forgiveness. So Johnson's saying that the person sitting there should be afraid because the dying person is going to be God first. You better forgive her.
So
pickleball.
If you have these situations in your own life, you know, if it's a situation where it's somebody else, I don't know how much you can do. I mean, obviously you can have a conversation with the person who's unwilling to forgive, to say, you know, this isn't about them, this is about you needing to let go. That said, we could all look at a situation and say, you know, after a lifetime of mistreating someone, is it fair to, in your last days or weeks, to say, I'd really like for you to forgive me, and expect them to do that? No, that's not a fair or reasonable request. But the conversation to have with that other person is, it's not about that. It's not about balancing the scales, it's not about justice, it's not about any of that. This is about you moving on with your life and not being weighed down by this. And so that's a conversation that I think has to happen internally with that person who's being asked to forgive. I think when we ask people to forgive us, I think if they say no, I guess I'd look at it and say that's their choice. I mean, we can't control that situation. All we can do is our end of being sincere, apologizing, changing our ways. But there are people in our lives who are just going to say no. No. And you can't, you know, I've said to y'all over and over again, and it's nothing you don't know, but you cannot control anybody else. And you shouldn't want to. It's a hard thing.
You know, my mom has carried this for over 40 years, that her mother never forgave her. And her mother died, never forgiving my mom, and she's never gotten over it, really. She really hasn't. Her mother never.
Yeah. Everybody hear that? For 40 years, her mom's carried the fact that her mother wouldn't forgive her. And that's haunted her for all this time. Yeah, withholding forgiveness from someone who's seeking it, that is a particular form of vengeance, for sure. That is a very direct and powerful form of vengeance. The question is that what you want to be about? So I think this practicing forgiveness, being forgiving, prepares us for those moments when someone seeks that. Even to just, I've had moments in my life where I said yes, because I knew, I trusted, I believed that that's what I was supposed to do. Not because I felt it at that moment, not because I could in all sincerity say, yeah, I've let this go, but I could in all sincerity say, yes, I want to. And I think sometimes, I don't know if that's enough, but sometimes that's all you got. But I think that intent matters.
Sometimes that helps you get there.
Yeah, and certainly in those situations, it certainly would help move you in that direction. Somebody else, Dawn?
I read a book by a lady named Corrie ten Boom. Some people may know her. She was a Dutch lady, and she harbored Jews, and she ended up in a concentration camp. And she lived, but her sister died in the concentration camp. Her father died in the concentration camp. But when she got out, because her sister was just such an influence on her, she actually started to have conferences for forgiveness, and she would speak to Nazis and people like that. And she was at a conference one time, and a Nazi guard that she actually recognized in her particular camp came and asked her for forgiveness. And she said that she just stood there and she thought, I can't do that. And she said she just prayed, God, you move my hand, because I know this is what you want me to do. And so I'm going to go on what you want me to do until I can catch up with you and be on the same page. But yeah, that would be
Yeah, and I guess I always looked at it and said, even if I can't with full sincerity say it, if it releases that other person from that burden, then that's something at the very least. That's a good that can come out of it. And I'm left right where I was before they asked for it. You know what I'm saying? I'm no better or worse off for having granted that than not. It's still my work to do to let go of my anger.
Yeah, because you're still not necessarily forgetting.
You're definitely not forgetting.
You're just moving on.
Yeah.
Is that?
Go ahead.
Is that being honest?
Probably not. I think, like I said, I think I could say in all sincerity that I want to forgive them, and that is my goal. To say, I couldn't say I have forgiven you, or I do. I could say, yes, I will forgive you. And that's the way I phrase it too. You know how we phrase things to get out of the.
I would go with
to not really lie, but to say I will forgive you. Well, I will at some point. That's my intent. But no, you're right. There's an element of being honest, but I guess I've always looked at it and said, in that moment, if that dishonesty frees them, I think I can live with that.
Just tag on to that. With God's help,
certainly,
I will forgive you.
Certainly.
Because sometimes we aren't able to forgive on our own.
We're making progress, so we're not in perfection. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I have a question going back to the first meeting, forgive me, but it pertains to this because I've struggled with that and I'm not sure I heard it correctly.
Okay.
About forgiving the person, but I don't remember if it was forgiving the person and not forgiving the act. Or was it the opposite? Forgiving the act and not forgiving the person?
Okay, I think what you're referring to is he said that we forgive actions. We forgive the things people do. We don't forgive people for who they are. He says we have to accept people for who they are. So in other words, if someone just constantly gets on your nerves and they're always making decisions that irritate you and or offend you, etc., etc., he says you can forgive them for particular actions, but you can't just forgive them for who they are. You may find that you don't like them. You may find that you don't want to be around them. But he said you can either accept who they are or not, but you don't forgive who they. You know, you can't forgive someone for just being a mean person. Forgive them for doing mean things. Does that make sense?
If I can keep it straight,
yeah. Sometimes we struggle to forgive someone when what we're trying to do is forgive them for who they are. But they keep being who they are, so it makes it very difficult to forgive them for who they are. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's do the next little section here.
See, all these petty instances of where, you know, I have a standard of the way I'd like to be. And then I apply that to other people, since I fall way short of that myself, and I don't have to look at that. And all these people have done, through my whole life, there's this litany of petty ills that have been done to me. And those people really aren't in my life anymore. I sort of just discard them, rather than have to deal with that. And my son, the other day, I discovered, we live on a kind of in the country on a rather large place, and there's corners of our property that, you know, go unseen for long periods of time. And I'm a big schemer and have had plans to do one thing and another. And I've got this stash of beer kegs, old stainless steel beer kegs down there by the lower fence that I was going to make gas tanks for some boat that I hadn't built yet. And he had gotten down there with a wrecking bar, you know, kind of a gigantic crowbar with some of his friends, and they were trying to pierce one of those, to tear it up. I mean, he was 9 years old, and at age 9, you just try and tear things up. That's kind of the way life is. And I discovered it long after he'd done that, and apparently had had some interaction with his mother about that. I was so angry when I found that. I mean, those were mine, you know, and he was destroying my property. And I confronted him with it, and I just, you know, I really kind of blew the whole thing up. And I realized that this is one of those incidences in my life that I've just discarded people over. You know, you obviously don't care about my things, you don't care about, you know, how I feel, and, you know, to hell with you, and then walk off. And I can't do that with my 9-year-old son. And so, you know, I talked to him a little bit, and I tried to be honest with him, and then I said, look, I want to forgive you for this. You know, I want to let this go, and I want to forgive you. And it felt so strange to do that, but it was so freeing in a way. And I'm just not angry at him about that anymore. And then I had to look back, over time. Now, those cakes been down there about 10 years. Before he was born, I had those. And I was so outraged that he had damaged those. Well, I had acquired those. I guess in the street we say I swiped those at one point years ago.
Wow.
And this is the standard of judging others, that I just want to be so righteous, and I'm not, and I'm learning to forgive.
I find it the incident a terribly intriguing one, and I see so many parallels in my own experience, having brought up kids who sometimes did something that I didn't want them to do, and discovering that I was angry at them, not so much because of what they did to something, but that their doing of it reflected on me. And their doing of it was a way of saying, I don't care about the old man's feelings. I don't care about my relationship to him. I don't care if he's hurt by this. I don't even think about it. So I'm angry at my son for reasons other than the ones I'm focusing on. My youngest son, bless his soul, he's a wonderful God, but he had a lot of obstacles in his way of life. I won't go into what they are, but he had a lot to fight against from his birth. And he had reason to believe that he was not going to live beyond the age of 21. So he didn't see much point in anything. So he was doing some things in his adolescence that were pretty self-destructive. And some of them involved the family and involved me. And I remember one incident in which I was enraged. I was so angry at him. I grabbed him and I said, "You're my enemy. I love you, but you're my enemy. You're hurting me so bad that you're my enemy. And I don't know what to do." And my wife and I went out that night, an engagement we had prior to that. But he was the only thing on my mind. I said, "We'll talk when I get back." And I said to him, only half believing it, I said, "John, I want you to know that I forgive you. I want you to know that this didn't happen. Didn't happen. In my memory, didn't happen. I forgive you." Well, that was half truth. But if I were speaking the whole truth, I would have said, "I want to forgive you, and I'm going to try." But what did I forgive him for? I forgave him for assaulting my pride and my dignity and reminding me that I wasn't a successful parent. That's what I had to forgive him for. And that wasn't fair. That wasn't fair. In a way, I forgave him for doing something. But the thing I said I was forgiving him for wasn't the thing that was bothering me, that was hurting me. What was hurting me with my pride in being, and what was hurting me with the pride I wanted in being a successful father. And I wasn't a successful father. And he was reminding me of that. That's what hurt me. And I was being an idiot. What he did didn't really reflect on me. And what David's son did with those beautiful stainless steel beer kegs was not an assault on his father. It didn't reflect on his father. But his father thought it did. He interpreted it as being a reflection on him. So there was a lot of mushy stuff going on there that wasn't brought up to the surface. But the wonderful thing is, my telling my son I forgave him got me on the road to coming to terms with what I was really hurting about. And I suspect the same thing was happening to David. We live in a world where people get hurt, where good people hurt us, bad people hurt us badly. That's a fact about reality. The question is, how can we most creatively live in a world where people hurt each other? I think God is saying to us, I tried forgiving. It worked with me. I invite you to try it on each other. In the long run, it's the only remedy for pain you didn't have coming and pain you can't get rid of. This is the only way. And as I said a million times, you forgive somebody and you begin to dance instead of wallow. You begin to walk with God. You ride the cosmic crest of love. You set a prisoner free, and you discover the prisoner you set free was you.
All right. For this next section for y'all to discuss, it's actually quite a few questions there. There's 4 questions. You don't have to discuss them all. Just look through them and figure out a couple there. And then the last 2, number 1 and 2 there, we'll discuss as a group, or we'll discuss at your table later. But go ahead and tackle 1 or 2 of these questions that are on here.
I just wonder if it's silent.
We're self. It sounds like a sister squabble there.
I think you have to define what do you mean by mess? I mean,
I don't know.
There's all kinds of, if they demolish all your things, like they develop a pipe bomb, blow your house up, I think you're very upset.
That's one level of messing with your stuff, certainly. Yeah. I was thinking something smaller, but that's a good example.
Yeah.
It's like a neighbor who maybe comes over and borrows your stuff all the time and doesn't return it.
But we as individuals, our identity is wrapped up in our stuff.
I think it speaks to a connection that we have to our stuff, certainly. Definitely.
That's a good point, Mary Ann.
I know, but I can still wear a hat, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely at the heart of a part of why it bothers us so much. We equate that connection of us, that it's an insult to us personally. Our stuff is an extension of us. And when people disrespect that, they're disrespecting us. So yeah, I think certainly the level at which we carry it. Anything else on that question?
And also, can boundaries be a part of that as well?
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah. Oftentimes, if you're talking about your own kids and stuff, it's a little different, but you're talking about other people, certainly people without good boundaries, or that maybe you haven't set good boundaries, that can certainly be a place where they are in your life in inappropriate or unwelcome ways. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned the neighbor thing. It's silly, but 2 things I've gone to fix this week, and I realized I no longer had the tool I needed because I loaned it to somebody and they never gave it back.
Do you have Wes's tools, Mike?
His stuff I was trying to fix. His stuff I was trying to fix, he caused my irritation. No.
Notice I stayed out of that.
No. You're smart. So the next one, or we'll really do the next 2 together. Do you find yourself angry with others because we believe their actions reflect on us? Or does it make you angry when others' actions illuminate your own shortcomings?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes and yes.
I think with your kids in particular, when they've done things that you think, how stupid could you possibly be to do something like that? And they're going to think, everybody's going to think like, you didn't bring your kids up very well, you didn't teach them very well, what kind of parent were you? Yeah, I think that, for me, that was always a concern.
Okay.
Your mother probably had the same concern.
My mother is dead, you're going to have to forgive her.
I talk to her regularly.
Still trying to figure him out.
Anybody else? Other situations? Yeah.
I just, in playing on what Mike was saying, we were talking about that, and I think sometimes we care too much about what other people think. and it gets in the way of our relationship with our children. If we're raising them to please other people, then we're raising them wrong. We raise them to be responsible, thoughtful, caring citizens, individuals.
You know,
And knowing that they're going to make mistakes along the way.
Yep.
You know, an apology to them goes a long way, I think. With our oldest, I always, you know, you wanted to be, she was going to be the perfect little girl, you know. And so, and it was going to reflect on me. And in later years, I realized how terribly hard I was on her for that reason, and actually have apologized to her and to all of them. And I just don't feel like we deserve any one of them. They just grew, you know, and sincerely apologize for what they felt or didn't feel. Maybe they didn't do that years ago, you know. If you had a, what do you call, what kind of father do we call him? Very hard, we were talking about that early, authoritarian type of personality. You grew up with that, and there were a lot of hurts with that, and so I made it in my business anyway, to apologize to each one of our children and say, I'm sorry. We weren't given a book, by the way, except Spock, but we used to.
Most of the people I run into.
That's for that one. That's where I live.
Yeah, and I would even extend this. Certainly, I think kids, and that's probably what's most prevalent with you all. It's certainly many of the conversations that you have with me about things that are troubling you is really now with your kids and to some degree grandkids and things. But I would say that this even is something that you see in organizations, churches. How can that person act that reflects poorly on the rest? How can you come to this church and think that way? I mean, we probably don't. Most of us wouldn't voice that, and most of us are pretty tolerant of other people's thoughts. But there is that element of, seriously, are you thinking that? So this kind of reflecting on us, I think is something that doesn't just happen with our kids. It can happen in any group that we care about, that we participate in with other people who aren't perfect just like us. So I think it's something to be aware of in all your dealings. Okay? And the other piece there about people illuminating our shortcomings. In other words, when other people call us out or whatever, many times our gut reaction is to lash out, to get angry, to get hurt, to think we need to forgive them for being so mean to us, when in reality we had it coming. Every word they said was true, and we needed to hear it, etc., etc. That's not always an easy thing to get to, and sometimes that comes intentionally. Sometimes people will just say, hey, look, here's your problem, deal with it. And sometimes they do it just through their own actions, through them being better than us in that situation, or in that we see our shortcomings, and sometimes we have a tendency to want to get angry with those people. So, well, they're goody two-shoes, or look how uppity they are, etc., etc., etc. When in reality, it's an opportunity for us to learn, to grow. So I just encourage you with both of those to pay attention, because that can happen in any group, any place. It's not just with your kids or with close relations. That can happen all over the place. All right, last one there. Do we project our own issues on those around us? And if so, what does it do to those relationships? In other words, example you all use, if we're worried about what people think about us, chances are we're going to make our kids worry about what people think of them. That's going to be something that we instill in them, etc., etc. What do you all think?
I think it can obviously strain the relationship. I mean, you know, you're saying, well, don't you think like me? If you don't, then you're an idiot.
With the political scene changing or coming about, there's going to be more and more of that, because, you know, with the last election, we had, being of another party, we had relatives calling us well, you need to think this way. You need to vote for these people. And I just said, interesting for your remarks. Very interesting. But when I got off the phone, I was like, because I thought, how nervy, how very nervy. These are people I love telling me that I should vote a certain way.
Well, I've got a brother that I do not talk religion with, or I do not talk politics with, because we are complete opposites as well. We just leave, if he starts in that subject, I do a complete turn. Let's change the subject here and go to something else. That's not good.
Anybody else on this one? All right, let's look at the last two questions. I think we'll just discuss these as a group. Do you believe that forgiveness can change your heart and your life? And if so, do you want to change?
Absolutely.
Yes. Everybody thinks it can?
Yes.
Yes.
Does everybody want that?
Absolutely.
It depends.
Okay. There's a bit of honesty, because I was going to say something along the same lines. What do you mean it depends, Marianne?
Well, sometimes you're just not ready to do it, and I think the thing is that you know that it can make a difference, but you're just not ready to go there yet. And I think that, a lot of times people think that forgiveness is so easy, if you can verbalize it, but the thing is that if you're honest with yourself, you know that it's not easy, and you know that it's going to change your heart and your life, but you have to be ready for that. And I know a lot of times I've gone through that, and I said, yeah, I want to do this, but maybe tomorrow.
Yeah. I think that this is kind of at the heart of this question. Do you believe it can happen? Yes. Do you want to change? Yes, I want to change. Okay, now you need to, now hold on. I'm not ready to actually change anything. I'm just saying I would like to, in theory. Yeah. Sometimes the actual letting go, the being vulnerable, that's where the rubber meets the road, and you're right. It's not just the saying, I forgive you. Yeah. Gritting your teeth and going on.
People who have had someone in their family been killed by somebody, been murdered. Okay? I don't know how those people can forgive. I mean, that to me would be really, really, really tough. And I hope I'm never in a position where I have to do that. I think it'd be horrible to carry that around with me all the time and be angry and mad and all that kind of. But how the devil do you get past that particular point? That's a big issue. For me, I think it was just hard.
How do you get past that? I'll throw other issues out that we mentioned earlier. Someone who's been abused sexually, otherwise by a parent. How do you get past these big issues?
I think prayer. Yeah, I think it's just a process, because I think sometimes even if you're willing and you want to, and you're trying to make those changes, like sometimes, your emotions, your whole psyche is affected by it, and you think you're letting go of something, but then you get into another situation and you realize like there's something still left in there, and because you don't know. It's sometimes that damage is so pervasive, like you can't even deal with it all at one time. So it's just a process. Things come up, you gotta deal with that thing again.
Others' actions can put you right back feeling the way you felt, or
especially if you have a day-to-day or weekly contact with the person that abused you or did something really terrible, and they just go on with their lives like it never happened, and you think that you've reached that point of forgiving them, but then they reappear in your life and they do something that brings it all back. How do you get beyond that? I just don't think you can on your own. You've got to trust God to help you.
You have probably group type therapy for that. I know a lot of folks that had their children either killed accidentally or on purpose. And, talking to them and how they got through it, whatever, this process. of getting to that point, but they always ask me, I'm talking about somebody, somebody needs help, they always want to help, and they have these groups, and you can go and group therapy sessions, which helps people a lot to get over that anger, that
If you're with
I can't
people that
believe
have
it,
the
this
same
is not
thing.
real, child got killed, I know one person not too long ago, the child got in the car with the group they didn't go bowling with. It was about 2 days before Christmas, and the girl just got a driver's license. She takes off and going too fast around the curve, has a wreck. No one's hurt but him, broke his neck, killed him. 13 years old. And let me tell you, it's been a long road to hoe. It's still been 2 years, but trying to get him to go through it and all, it's tough. And you say, well, and try to confront the other person, driver of the car, and they have a whole different attitude about it. This is what was killing them. They wouldn't come out and talk about it. They wouldn't, but they thought they were going to help her, that she would be grieving, but she wasn't. So it's tough. That's tough. You just need a lot of help. That's all I can say.
Definitely in big situations like that, sometimes you find the other person is unable, even if they want, they're unable to agree because they can't let themselves go there.
Right.
They're not vulnerable and mature enough to be able to deal with the pain and the reality of what they did, and so they shut it out. Matt, you had
something that hit close to home in Charleston was the Mother Emanuel Church, the slayings, and I thought it was remarkable that within a week or two, some of those folks were saying, I forgive him. And the thoughts in my head is, how can you so quickly, I was absolutely amazed, astonished.
And I think part of the answer to your question, Mike, to me, begins with, and the reason I asked this question, is believing wholeheartedly before these situations happen that forgiveness is important, and not just important, but it's what God's calling us to do because God wants something better for us, and believing that forgiveness can happen, that it can change your heart. I think truly believing and trusting in that is a big step with being able to forgive, particularly in those big situations, because everything in you is saying, I want to hang on to this. And so we have to have that inner drive in us that's saying, no, you've got to let go of this. You've got to. And trusting more in God than in the feelings that we're having and the revenge and all of that. Beyond that, I don't know what the answer is, but I do believe that it starts with believing that forgiveness is a better way. Not just in theory. Not just saying, yeah, that makes sense, sure, it'd be great, but truly believing and saying, this is what I want to be a part of my life. This is how I want to live my life as a forgiving person. And so when those things happen, you're maybe not ready, but you at least have the tools you need to begin to deal. Anything else on that one? Number 2, this one we touched on. Do you believe that God can and will help you to forgive? I think that goes along with what I was just saying, is that belief. I think it's powerful to recognize that we're not in it alone. That in those deepest, darkest, most hate-filled, anger-filled moments, God is there.
Is there a difference between belief and know? I know that he will.
Okay.
Is there a difference?
Well, I guess I would define the difference as saying to know in our modern world is something I think of as fact. Like to know is something you can prove. To believe is to know it without being able to prove it, without being able to demonstrate it in a way that someone else can clearly see. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Belief, faith, those words tend.
Probably, but I would still say I know because I've seen too much proof myself. Okay, so I know. I don't believe. I know that my Redeemer liveth. Old Baptist hymn.
Anybody else with that?
Yeah, I was thinking the very first time we met here on this subject, you brought up the subject, or somebody, I think you brought it up, the Lord's Prayer. At least once a week, we ask to be forgiven. And then right after that, we say, as we forgive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a way, if we don't mean that, well, then we need to ask God to help us forgive.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when you go through all of that, when you look at those last two sentences, and then when you really do, as you know, sometimes when you go through that process of knowing that you want your life to be changed, and but there is a time that comes where you really do feel a difference, and that you might not be able to put a word to that. But I also think that once you realize that you have been forgiven, I think there's a little bit of humility that also comes into your heart at that time, that then carries you on and makes you really think about the next time, you know, because, you know, like Josh says, you know, she knows, and that's such a wonderful gift for her to know that is, you know, that is possible, that it is there. But I think for myself, you know, that forgiveness has always been a big struggle, and even though, you know, but I find that once it really has touched my heart, I don't know if it's a little voice that speaks up or whatever, but I feel at that particular moment a sense of really being humble. Of course, it doesn't stay with me long, but until the next time. But I think forgiveness also allows you to experience humility, if that makes any sense.
Certainly.
You know, and
that should be one of the reactions to being forgiven. Certainly.
It reminds me of the foot washing we had. Do you remember the foot washing we had? What a humbling, gosh, wasn't that? And we talked about foot washing today. Maybe we could do that again. Was that at Easter?
We do it every Monday, Thursday. So you'll have a chance in a couple weeks. Yep.
Because, you know, and the sad thing about forgiveness, too, is that, you know, we get caught up in so many of our own personal issues and things like that, that we forget that forgiveness is out there. And I, for myself, that's why forgiveness has always been a struggle for me. You know, even though, as Kurt says, we say that prayer, you know, on Sundays, but a lot of times when I say that prayer, I find that it's just rote, you know, that it doesn't sink into my head or my being.
It's real easy to not use it.
Right.
Yeah, certainly. Really?
And I know you can't relate to this, but for those of us who are older and have had more experiences and perhaps more pain and hurt, you've tucked it down so deep and for so long, you don't recognize it as a need to forgive. It's just there as pain. And you've never really thought about, at least I have never really thought about it in terms of forgiveness. And this has made a world of difference to me.
Although I'm not nearly as old as you all. I do recognize what you're saying, and that was something I was thinking just this evening while you all were discussing. I was thinking, you know, because I know that in me there's pain and hurt and anger and things, but how do you identify it? Right. What is it? Where do you place it? Who needs to be forgiven and what? That is hard and challenging work. I definitely understand that.
And that's going to take time. And talk about the process of going back through that, and that's painful by itself. But then knowing that at the end it's
And you know, Wes, that's why I think our AD groups are so important.
I talked about that with my AD group at our last meeting. I talked about a couple of situations where I was trying to recognize and realize, and talked about pains that I'd probably just push down and said, well, you just need to move on, and that, you know, this person treated you. But I came out of that a different person, not for the better in a lot of ways, and so that's probably, I think AD groups are certainly a place to talk about that. Let's wrap this up. I do want to tell you, next week will be our last week of this. We'll do it a little bit different next week. We'll go over to the sanctuary. We'll have a little more discussion, but then we'll have a little bit of a service wrapping all this up as well. So next week we'll come and do our dinner, and then we'll go over there for the program part of the service. So let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for bringing us together, for the gift of friendship and fellowship. We ask that you would give us wisdom and strength to grow in our understanding of what it means to forgive, what it means to be forgiven. Help us to reach out with love and compassion to those around us, and to receive that gift freely from you and others. All this we ask in your Son's holy name. Amen. Thank you.